back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and I'm sitting here with Sam Dunn in the Jack Jouett House. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing good. We're here in another historical site of Kentucky, nestled off the beaten path here in Woodford County. You may or may not know about Jack Jouett, but that's what we're going to talk about here today. But first, Sam, tell us about your Kentucky connection.
Well, I was born in western Kentucky in Marshall County, which is over there by Murray and Paducah, and lived in Louisville for a couple of years, just moved to Lexington. And I love the Jack Jouett House. I'm a little biased, but I think it's one of the most beautiful examples of an early colonial home.
Yes, I think so as well. You can come here, you can do tours. I guess let's get that out of the way. What is the hours and so forth as far as the house goes?
We are open for tours, no appointment necessary, Friday and Saturday, 10 to 5, Sunday, 1 to 5. And you can actually email us through our website, through Facebook, Instagram, and schedule a tour during the week as well.
So pretty accessible, easy to come by. A lot of history here, but I'd say some of the listeners probably don't know who Jack Jouett is or why his house is important. So let's start back with Jack Jouett before he even got to Kentucky, because that's what he's most known for.
And before I get into that, I do want to say it's completely free to come to Jack
Oh,
Jouett.
yeah, that's a good note.
Yeah, so it's a great place to bring your kids, your family, and all of our events are free as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, but why would you come to the house? I guess it's a draw. Well, Jack Jouett was a famous Virginia patriot. He came from a long line of patriots. His brother, all of his brothers, and his father were patriots as well. But he's most famous for a famous ride that he did, a ride to save Thomas Jefferson and really over 30 other patriots from British forces. Mm-hmm. And I can go ahead and go ahead. So as your listeners probably know, in roughly 1799, 1780, the British haven't had any success capturing George Washington. So they decided to send General Cornwallis and his troops down to the Carolina, Virginia area. Their plan is to cut the country in half, basically try to destroy the Patriots here. June 3rd, 1781, they send Bannister Tarleton. And you don't know Bannister Tarleton, he's the inspiration for the bad guy in the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson. He was a colorful character. He was infamous for really being a bad guy. He had no compunction against going after civilians.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you need a villain name, I think Bannister Tarleton is about perfect.
It screams, massacre. So they send Tarleton. This is June 3rd, 1781. Tarleton's mission is to go from Hanover Courthouse to Charlottesville, Virginia. He plans to stop near Charlottesville to capture Thomas Jefferson. Mm-hmm. At this time, Thomas Jefferson is at Monticello. He's the patriotic governor of Virginia. They're going to capture Jefferson and then move on to capture the rest of the Virginia legislature. Mm-hmm. And of course, I don't want to get too graphic with it, but capture at this time, especially with a guy like Tarleton, that means capture and kill.
Death, yeah.
Death, yeah. So it's a dire situation. It's a dire situation for Jefferson, but for the whole patriotic cause in the South. Mm-hmm. They are leaving Hanover Courthouse January 3rd, 1781. They pass by a place called the Cuckoo Tavern, which is a great name, and I wish it was still there. I'd love to go get a beer at the Cuckoo Tavern. But luckily, our hero, Patriot Jack Jouett, is sleeping under a tree outside the Cuckoo Tavern, and your listeners can draw their own conclusions about why.
Well, what sleeping he was doing?
Yeah, what sleeping he was doing, but they knew how to have a good time back then. Yeah. But as the legend goes, he's sleeping outside under the tree, and he sees the British go past, and he's a local, and he knows there's only one place they could be going. They're going to Monticello and to Charlottesville. Tarleton has, over 250 Hessian mercenaries and other troops, and Jack is one guy. He can't stop him. This isn't like a Thermopylae Spartan, but he's not trying to hold them off. But he's a local and he has this knowledge of the terrain, and he knows that he can take an old logging trail, kind of as a shortcut. He's going to take this old logging trail to a older road called the Three Notch Road. And it's important for us to remember that this is the middle of the night.
Yeah, wow.
Yes, and it's the middle of the night in June. It's hot, muggy, dark, and he gets on this old logging trail, and regardless of whether or not he had a few drinks of wine at the Cuckoo Tavern, it's dangerous, and he's getting hit in the face with debris and sticks and rocks. At one point, he's even thrown from his horse.
Wow.
It's quite dangerous, but he makes it off that logging trail onto the Three Notch Road. A quick note about how dangerous this ride was. Of course, he's riding a horse alone in the middle of the night, but he's injured so badly from the sticks and the debris that he's scarred for life on his face and his body.
Oh.
And we'll probably talk about it, but he had a famous portrait painter in his family, but he never got his portrait painted. And we believe he was at least self-conscious of those scars. So that's how dangerous the ride was. It scarred him for life. But he does get there. He makes it to the Three Notch Road, and he makes it to Monticello to Warren Jefferson just minutes before the British get there. As the legend says, Jefferson gives him a glass of wine and says, "Thank you so much." And Jefferson gets the heck out of Dodge what he can. Jack Jouett goes on to Charlottesville. He warns all of the politicians, the patriotic politicians there, and that includes people like Patrick Henry and Daniel Boone.
Hey.
I know that you guys have done that Daniel Boone series, and they all, get out with just minutes to spare too. Interesting note: Daniel Boone's actually captured.
Oh yeah.
But he is not yet this famous legendary figure.
That'd be way before he kind of gets all his notoriety, probably. But yeah, that's pretty heroic, I guess, to say the least. And a lot of people think about Paul Revere and all that kind of stuff. But this is kind of, if you want to say Paul Revere 2.0.
Don't even get me started about Paul Revere. I could go on, but Paul Revere was captured. Right, Jack Jouett, and he had backup. Jack Jouett wasn't captured, and he had no one else doing it.
It was a solo mission. He deserves credit, right?
I think so, yes.
And that's pretty good thought, a point to make. And a lot of people talk about the Revolutionary War, and yes, this happened more in the Revolutionary War field, but a lot of stuff was going on in Kentucky during the Revolutionary War. And then Jack Jouett, what's the rest? From after the ride till the time he comes to Kentucky, what's his role, I guess?
You don't see really. There's not much of a time difference between the two. The Revolutionary War, the surrender at Yorktown is about 6 months after he does his ride. Of course, after that, Jefferson becomes president. We can get into that later, but he comes to Kentucky about a year later, in the early to mid 1780s. Marries his childhood sweetheart once he gets here, and he is a part of the Virginia legislature for what was then called, the county of Kentucky.
Yeah.
And then is actually on one of the committees for Kentucky statehood.
Oh yeah.
So he actually kind of was a voice advocating for Kentucky independence. Once Kentucky reached, got their independence in 1792, he is in the Kentucky State House, and he's actually a member of the very first Kentucky House of Representatives.
Well, that's pretty cool. And to think, he's got a buddy. You would think the president, he would have some pull, right? To say, hey, Jefferson, remember that time I saved your life? Running down the I was gonna say street, but it wouldn't be a street path.
Yeah. And about Jefferson, he's actually mentioned in some of Jefferson's his diaries and stuff. Talking about Jouett.
Yeah, Thomas Jefferson's a pretty well-researched and notable character. We don't need to get into him too much, I guess. But it is cool that he's.
That might be another podcast.
It is cool that he's he's written by Jefferson, or Jefferson mentions him, which he saved his life technically. If he would have been captured, it would have been a different story, and so forth. But I think too that when he got there, Jefferson wasn't necessarily too apt. He wasn't necessarily rushing and hey man, we got to go. They're coming. They're right down the road. But pretty interesting story. So he comes to Kentucky though, and which his house here, is this the first place he built?
No, it wasn't actually. So he comes to Kentucky and he's been awarded some land by the Virginia legislature. He's bought a little bit of it. Quite often, Revolutionary War veterans are rewarded with land.
Mm-hmm.
He's got land in Bath County. He's got land here, and he's living, in a series of homes moving around. And at the time he comes here, he actually moves to this property. We're in Woodford County in 1797. And at that point, we are actually here in the parlor of the house. So listeners, we're actually sitting in Jack Jouett's living room right now. But he actually, there's a smaller stone cabin on the property. He moves into there. Jack, Sally, and over 10 of their children in a small stone cabin. And that year, 1797, he begins to build the home that we're sitting in right now.
And so the first stone or the first cabin, was it here or is that the one in Bath?
So that's actually the one that is directly behind us that we walked in.
Yeah.
That cabin was built late 1760s, early 1770s.
Yeah.
And the legend of that specific structure is that it was built by the founder of bourbon, Elijah Craig's brother.
Okay. Okay.
So supposedly that was built by a member of the Craig family.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. And then so then this house was built. Man, what'd you say? 10 kids though? Whew.
He had 12 kids.
12 kids.
11 of them survived to
okay. Wow, that's pretty impressive as well.
It is.
How long did it take them, to build this place? Because I think of brick houses, and of course, being in Lincoln County, William Whitley's the first one that comes to mind because his was the first. But as more people came in during those 1780s, 1790s, it was probably a bit more common and probably a bit easier. But how long, or do you know how long it took them to build it?
I don't know specifically. I would imagine that Sally, his wife, she doesn't like that cramped quarters in the stone cabin, so I imagine she's on him to build this.
Very true.
And as as like upper middle class homes go, it's not that large.
Yeah.
So it probably didn't take too long to build. I would guess a year, maybe 2 max.
Yeah, and but as you even just said, the size of this I think is pretty good size. It's the 3-room, and not just like a small cramped room, but 3 full-size room. Did they all sleep in the same place in the cabin, or how'd that work? Or
so actually, there's a door out there to your right. That leads up to 2 children's rooms that also could have doubled as guest rooms. And I will say, if you guys do want to visit the Jack Jouett House, please do. We're one of the only historic homes where you can go upstairs.
Wow.
So the house is still structurally, sound enough that we can go everywhere in the house. But they would have slept, the Jewetts, Jack and Sally would have slept in the master bedroom. The kids would have slept either upstairs during the winter, and during the summer, they didn't have AC, obviously, much less indoor plumbing.
Yeah.
So when they can, the kids are often sleeping outside.
Oh wow.
Just to stay cool.
Wow. Yeah, you don't think about that at all, but it gets pretty hot in Kentucky in the summer, and if you don't have no AC or nowhere else, sometimes that would be cooler. Cool nights, cool Kentucky nights would be enjoyable. You might get bit by a few bugs, but I guess that would be you got to pick what you want. Now, as far as the house goes and some of the stuff in here, because you got a lot of good, I guess, say antiques. What are some of the cool stuff?
In the dining room right now, we actually have an amazing antique sideboard. A sideboard is also called a buffet table.
Yeah.
And quite often they sit, in dining rooms. We've got that. That one was actually produced about circa 1805, so around 1805, 1800. It's actually produced in Lexington as well.
Oh, that's even cooler.
That's just a beautiful piece. It's got like a cherry veneer. And I love telling a good story about that piece because we went and picked it up from a gallery. It had been sitting in a gallery, and the owner of the gallery actually stood on top of the sideboard to hang something on the wall.
Oh.
So it's a over 200-year-old piece of furniture, and it's holding the weight of a fully grown man.
Yeah. Wow.
It's beautiful, and it's still sturdy, still very strong. And I always compare it to my furniture, like my couch from IKEA, which is going to disintegrate in 4 years.
Yeah.
So that and the sugar chest, which is actually directly behind you right now. And also, got a cherry, and a lot of it's made up. At least the interior is tulip poplar. Just some beautiful Kentucky pieces.
Yeah.
And I think it says a lot about Kentucky craftsmanship, that you make something so beautiful that stands the test of time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's quite impressive. Both the fact that it's 200 years old and some guy stood on it. So
yeah, right. I'm about fancy, but it's
that's pretty cool. Now, what about like, and not just in the house, but let's say in the house and in the museum in the back there. What about Jack Jouett's? Do you have anything of his?
So we only have one thing that we actually believe belonged to Jack. And I will say about the house, we don't have much that was in the house, if anything, because the house was, inhabited continuously up until 1980.
Wow.
When the county took over. I want to give Woodford County a quick shout out because they actually are responsible for funding and preserving the house. So thank you to Woodford County Fiscal Court
for getting this together.
For helping us.
Wow. It's surprising that 1980. That's only 40 years ago.
Don't date yourself.
So yeah. I wasn't alive in 1980, but it was close to say. But to think that's only that long ago, because I think the William Whitley House, it was inhabited up until the early 1900s, and it was almost trashed. Some of the older pictures, and it was rough. And I don't know. Was this better maintained or?
Well.
Typical inhabitants.
Let me answer your first question, because I said that about the 1980s and the people living here because at that point everything that was here when the Jewetts were here has either been used up or sold or stolen or burned or whatever.
Yeah.
So we only have the one cool piece that we believe belonged to Jack Jouett. He passed away in Bath County at the home of his daughter. Yeah. They demolished that house several years ago, and in the cornerstone of that Bath County home, they found a book that had been placed in the cornerstone. Oh. It was a history book written shortly after the Revolution, and we got it here in the visitor center, and we believe it belonged to Jack Jouett.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty awesome. Yeah. So, as far as restoring this, was it a huge task or?
Oh, well, I wasn't born.
Well, yeah.
I wasn't born, in 1980 either, so I wasn't here, but. From what I've been told and from the research that I've done, they ripped up carpet and linoleum, and they found the beautiful, wood floors that you see today.
Yeah, wow.
And a lot of them are, pine and tulip poplar. There's been some replacements over the years, but the layout of the house is exactly the same, and these floors, minus a few replacements, are the ones that Jack Jouett would have seen too.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. Pretty good. I'll say thank you again to Woodford County Fiscal Court as well, because all the support that these historical sites need is very very important to me, the listeners, everybody I guess that's involved. But and more support is always needed as well. Keep it up, and that's why you should come and visit the Jack Jouett House, because the more people come visit, the more it's seen as a need and a value, I guess, to say it in that way. So as far as Jack Jouett, once he got here to Kentucky, what was his focus? Just living his life. We mentioned him being involved in the legislature. But what else was he? I'd say middle upper class at the time.
I would say middle to upper. Probably you wouldn't think he's up there with someone like Henry Clay.
Yeah.
And this is no Henry Clay state, unfortunately, but it's still nice. In the house, and I hope the listeners come and see, because I can give you a great tour. The house it does have, obviously, it has a cellar. It's got the nice wood floors, and it's completely constructed of bricks. So he obviously had some money, and he got that money, primarily from. He is a politician, obviously, but he's also a businessman. He's trading a lot. He's working with other kind of local elites. To bring in, tobacco, sugar, other high value, trade goods that he's gonna then ship all over the place. This house specifically is close to the Kentucky River,
Yeah.
So he's making a lot of business deals involving goods that come up the Kentucky River. And a lot of time that's like sugar, alcohol, molasses, stuff like that. And so most of his money is coming from, of course, trade, business deals. And he did a lot of those business deals in this room that we're sitting in now. He also was very big into livestock. So he's also raising, corn, different types of food. So he's a farmer, but a lot of his money is coming from raising livestock. And he actually started the first jockey club in Kentucky.
Oh, well, cool.
And for those of you guys that don't know what a jockey club is, eventually jockey clubs lead to what we now think of as Churchill Downs in Keeneland. So he was really big. He also bred horses. He was a big aficionado in horse racing. And like a lot of other people, he was a big gambler too. So I'm sure a few of the funds that went to build this house were maybe from some bets that he played with Henry Clay or something.
Well, that's it's just synonymous. It's, we're talking about Kentucky, we're going to get horse racing in there at some point. I just think too, like, how old was he then? If he was born in, 54?
Yeah, so he would have been, when he passed away, he was, in his late 60s. So when he was here in this, this part of Kentucky in this house, he was in his mid to late 40s and then eventually into his early 50s, which to us today doesn't seem like he's old, but to a guy who's, lived a hard life like Jack Jouett, and he spent most of his time outside, and of course he did the ride, which took a lot out of him and kind of honestly left him physically injured quite a bit. That's old.
Yeah. Coming over to Kentucky even during that time would be a rough journey. To think and you think of how he was, and you think about Daniel Boone. Daniel Boone lived to be pretty old considering what he went through.
Yeah.
But definitely for the times, that would probably be pretty typical. I don't know what the average lifespan was then, but I would think he's hitting it.
And it's hard living too. It's a strenuous thing, especially as a farmer with 500 acres just in this county. Yeah. He's constantly on the move, and I'm sure being a politician is stressful.
Yeah. With that too, with all that, like as far as his life, you talk about him gambling too. That was definitely that can put some stress on you.
Well, I've got some stories about gambling, but I probably will tell you those off air.
With his kids though, so he had 11 kids, and we mentioned this before we started. But what about his kids? What kind of legacy, I guess, did he leave as far as with his children, or what any of their success?
Several of his kids went off to do amazing things. Several of them married, they almost all of them married into prominent families. One of them was actually a soldier who married a niece of Zachary Taylor, and you had several other high-profile, relationships in there. His most famous child, as some of your listeners might know, is Matthew Harris Jouett. And Matthew Harris Jouett was obviously one of Jack Jouett's sons. We're actually looking at a replica of the self-portrait he did right now. He had an interesting relationship with his father. His father, Jack, sent obviously Matthew Harris Jouett to Transylvania University to study law. Supposedly, when he decided to become an artist instead, Jack said, "I sent him to become a lawyer," and he became a damn sign painter. So their relationship wasn't always good. But Matthew Harris Jouett went on to become one of the most famous artists in Kentucky history. He was a War of 1812 veteran. He was actually a paymaster in the War of 1812, and the pay chest he was responsible for was stolen.
Oh.
And because he's an honorable man, he took responsibility for that pay chest and spent the rest of his life trying to pay off that debt to the government.
Wow.
So he had kind of a sad life, but that financial need led him to paint some of the most important people in Kentucky history.
Got some examples, I guess, as far as that goes.
Well, he painted General Lafayette. It's in the old state capitol. He actually painted. He passed away before he was 40. He painted over 300 works of art in that time period.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. So there's actually an example over your right shoulder right there. I won't go into detail on it because it is on the loan.
Oh, okay.
But if
yeah.
you come to the Jouett House, we'll show it to you.
Yeah. Well, who is that though?
That would be Governor Desha.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Governor Joseph Desha. He was the 9th governor of Kentucky.
Yeah.
So we can't show a picture of it, but
yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. We all the paintings that you see at the Jouett House are going to be copies. Of Matthew Harris Jewett's portrait.
Not the original. Yeah.
Anyway, as I said, he passed away before he was 40. Pretty tragic, actually. Died of some sort of fever, like a lot of people did back then. Mm-hmm. But he's one of Jack's most famous, definitely his most famous
kid.
Yeah. And actually, catty corner to him across from us, that's a portrait of his son, Matthew Harris Jewett's son, Jack's grandson.
Yeah.
He was the mayor of Lexington twice and actually died at the Battle of Perryville.
Oh, wow. Wow. Union or Confederate?
I believe it was Union. I would imagine he was Union.
Yeah.
You saw most Confederates came from out west, almost like the Bowling Green area.
Yeah.
But I'll have to do some more research.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty interesting. I mean, connecting Jack Jouett to Revolutionary War all the way up to the Civil War, which I mean is pretty common. You can do that, but just to have that here all centered right here in Kentucky. The paintings are pretty awesome. I always think of Audubon. He was a big painter, but he wasn't born in Kentucky. He was born in Europe, I think. Yeah, I did a video on him. I think it's Europe, somewhere, France. No,
France.
No. Well, he was from France, but he was born. Maybe he was born in the Caribbean, but.
Like Hamilton.
Yeah.
The Jewetts were from France.
Oh yeah.
I think they were French Huguenots. It was Jouett. And then, of course, just kind of like Versailles here.
Add that T on there.
Yeah. Versailles here and Jouett. It's funny how things translate.
Well, you can eat Monticello, all those things.
Exactly.
It's all about how the locals say it. We'll say it however we want.
I get real offended if you say it wrong.
That's a pretty important historical figure here in Kentucky.
I often think, what would have happened if he had, not succeeded in his ride? All the stuff that Daniel Boone did. And of course, Daniel Boone was captured, so that was a little hard to talk about. But, what if Jefferson had been captured, or Patrick Henry? If Jefferson's captured, there's no Louisiana Purchase.
It changes everything.
And no Lewis and Clark. Lord knows how America would be different.
Very true. And that at that time in the Revolutionary War, things were looking promising for the Americans, and one of your prominent people get captured and possibly executed. That could very well change the tide, and so forth. That could be a completely different scenario.
I kind of think of it honestly as a last-ditch effort of the British. Mm-hmm. They get some information that they can maybe capture Jefferson and the others, and they say, "Well,
let's go for it.
Going good. We gotta go for it."
And too, that happens so much in history, and I'm sure people realize and think about it at times. But like same with Abraham Lincoln, his grandfather was killed in the middle of his farm in Kentucky, and the Native American was coming to possibly kill or capture his father, but Abraham Lincoln's uncle was able to shoot the native, and his father lived and grew up, and then had Abraham Lincoln, and then the 16th president, and simple things people don't think about, but could have changed the entire, or I should say, small events that happened that could have changed the entire way of history. But it's just pretty cool. Anything else right off that you think of that's like super interesting that people would want to come see? There's a cemetery out here. Is that any relation to the Jewetts or just other people?
So that cemetery was built early to mid 1800s. You got graves in there from about the 1820s to the late 1800s. Primarily it's the Morris family.
Okay.
And they lived here after the Jewetts. A couple cool things that I think people would really enjoy. If you're a Jouett descendant, definitely come take a look around. Yeah. My first tour I ever gave, when I got the job, I was giving a tour to some Jouett descendants, and a couple random people walked up. They got in on the tour too, and over the course of the tour, I found out that they were descendants of Henry Clay.
Oh, wow.
So I had Jewett descendants and Clay descendants, and we were standing here in the parlor where we are now. And I said, "Your ancestors came in here, and they used to talk in here all the time."
Yeah.
It's just really, Kentucky really is a small place, and it's so many interesting connections. But come to the Jouett House. The cemetery is amazing. It's good for genealogy research as well.
Yeah.
And we've got some stuff that other places I think don't have that set us apart. We've got the upstairs, the kids' rooms. And we try to tell a story, an evolving story, that this house was lived in until the 1980s. It was full of life. It's kind of a quiet, church-like space now. But when Jack and Sally were here, this place was loud.
It's chaos.
It was chaotic. They have, 11 kids. There's dogs barking. They're going crazy. I'm sure every now and then there's a party.
Yeah, well, coming from somebody with 3 kids, I can attest. More that's plenty to make it chaos. So 11. That's pretty good.
I do want to just tell the listeners real quick, if you guys have, if you can't make it out to the Jouett House, or if you make it out here and you can't make it out for a tour with me or with one of our docents, we do have a new self-guided tour on our website, so you can actually go on there, read a little bit about Jack Jouett and his ride, and then get a sense of where things are and what you're looking at.
Yeah.
And we're going to put some more exhibits on there too. And we do have events coming up all the time. We do yoga out here. We've got bluegrass nights coming up.
Cool.
So if you guys want to check us out on Facebook or Instagram, just search Jack Jouett.
Yeah.
You'll be able to keep up with what's going on.
Yeah, and that's something, something cool. Definitely if you can't come out here, check it out. But if you can, definitely come out and check it out, because as in anything in life, seeing it in person is way better than watching a video or seeing it in that sense. And you can get the feel of the area and that. This is my first time being here. I think it's really cool. It's just so cool to go back to a place that's so well kept and able to, I guess, kind of live in that moment or see that moment as it may have been. And like you said, there's a lot of good historical stuff here to see. None of it may be from Jack Jouett, just one little piece, but that's something that's worth checking out. And the other pieces here also have stories that you can tell as well.
You alluded earlier to Jefferson and the things that Monticello had been doing to come to terms with the realities of the situation as far as his relationship with enslaved peoples. We're doing something similar at the Jack Jouett House, and this is something that we're not trying to hide from or avoid. It's our responsibility to find the truth and share it with people. So we have learned a little bit about the enslaved people at the Jack Jouett House. We think that quite often some of them were slept upstairs with the children to watch the kids. Some of them, the ones associated with the house, were slept above the stone cottage. But there are some limitations and some difficulties with researching enslaved peoples.
Yeah.
Most of our information comes from stuff like wills or probate records or newspaper articles. But I do want to say that we've got a nice exhibit down in the visitor center about that, and I plan on putting an exhibit up on our website as well, just to let people know, this is what we know so far, and our research is continuing.
Yeah.
I think it is like our responsibility to tell those kind of hidden stories and those narratives that haven't been explored yet.
Yeah, and it's very true. You talk about genealogy and so forth like that, and this connects back. I was in Montgomery County a little bit ago, and they were telling us about how they had a family come in, and their ancestors had been slaves, and they were able to find that document, and how rare that was. It was like in 1820, and this person had I think it was a will of all the enslaved people they had, and there was that connection. And it's very hard to find, and it takes a little bit of time and some excessive digging, because most slave records, they just didn't keep up with them. They didn't have necessarily write down all their names and so forth, and it can get very blurry, I guess, to be or hard to determine. So that's another side, of course, of the story that it deserves to be told and mentioned. And that's, I mean, common for the time. It's not anything that sweep under the rug or anything like that. It was very, most people did. Even Benjamin Logan, who came over in 1775, had about 3 slaves, I think. A mother and her 3 children. That, I mean, it's history, and it has to be. All sides need to be told for sure.
Couldn't agree more about that.
Anything else before we wrap up here on what, like, just in general? I guess final sales pitch. Please come.
Please come to the Jack Jouett House. We've got stories about Kentucky, about the Revolution, about bourbon. we got a little something for everything. We've got Native American attacks and visits from the Clays. So we've got a little bit of everything. We've got stuff for kids as well. We're a great place to bring maybe you homeschool or you're just looking for something to do with your family on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
And it's never a bad thing to drive through beautiful Woodford County to see all the horses. And I'll be here waiting, and I couldn't be happy to give you a tour to be on this podcast.
Yeah, well, like you said, it is Kentucky to come through and check out some of the farmland while you come, and then meet up with Sam here and talk about Jack Jouett, who formed the first Kentucky saddle. What's it called again? Saddle Club or Jockey Club? Jockey Club. There you go. So pretty interesting guy. I can't, of course, the sales pitch continued. I can't, encourage you enough to come and visit the Jack Jouett House here, Southern Woodford County. If you want to be specific, because whenever I looked it up, I was like, okay, Woodford County. I was thinking of Versailles, Midway, but this is all the way opposite end. This is the southern part, so pretty easy to get to. Put it in your Google, and it'll bring you right here. Sam, I want to thank you again for inviting us up here to do this and talk about this good good place of Kentucky history, and we'll have to do it again.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
All right, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.